Are you trying to think of a word?
No.
Oh.
I got it.
You already Googled it?
No.
Don't you Google those.
Welcome to Emotionships, where we talk about the real reason everything happens for a reason. I am your host, Charlie Carroll, along with my clubby co-host,
Okay. What?
Mallory Redmond.
Like I'm in the club?
Yeah, clubby. No, friendly,
Going clubby?
social.
Oh.
Social.
It depends on the moment, but yes.
Yeah, friendly. You're friendly.
I can be friendly.
Mal, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, 4-day weekend. How was it? Tell us about it. What did you do?
Oh. I was at a really boring Memorial Day. Well, boring from the outside. Inside, I was loving it. I cleaned my house.
Okay.
I went grocery shopping with my kid. I mowed the lawn.
Whoa.
I mowed my lawn. And listen, so I don't
Whoa.
I don't mow the lawn very often. I like to do it, but I just don't have the time. So other people do it. Super satisfying.
Yeah.
Mowing the
sure.
lawn. Like I finished the backyard, which we have a decent sized backyard. And like, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I didn't do a very good job. Like I kind of sucked at it. Actually, everybody would have a lot to say about the way that I mowed the lawn.
Okay.
But the end product was like, I went on this whole thing in my head of like, maybe I should go into some sort of lawn care.
Okay.
Like professionally.
All right.
It was so satisfying. A different kind of satisfying than when I see someone else's manicured lawn.
Sure.
Like
I did
felt
this.
really good to see my manicured lawn. The grass is super green right now.
Yeah.
The lines are relatively straight.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think what satisfying work that is. I wonder if people in the lawn care industry feel that level of satisfaction when it's not their own home.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Anyway, I went on this whole thing. I knew somebody who worked for like a university doing their lawns, and like there's a whole science to it. Like it's a whole big thing. And so I went on this little rabbit trail of like, maybe I learn that science and do this for a living.
You know what I think it is? This is my philosophy on it. There are things in life that take a long time to see the results.
Yeah.
Right? You put so much time into it. And obviously you are functioning at a capacity in your life right now where you're leading a lot of people and you put trust in people that put trust in people to get an objective done. And you can see the results, but often not as quickly as cutting the grass.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the things that I really love about the restaurant industry is there tends to be a relatively short distance between what you're creating and the results that you get from it. Mm-hmm. Unlike like the church that we'll talk about here shortly that we just put to bed. Mm-hmm. You can invest in people and invest in ideas, and it takes years or even decades to see the results. And so my philosophy is for those that don't always have the luxury of leading in areas where they get to see like immediate results, you get to jump in and do your grass, and you get to see that immediate result, which feels so good.
Feels so good. I loved it. It was very satisfying.
So you cut the grass.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, the girls were home from daycare, which, is its own
Bittersweet.
Yeah. But it was, we had a good day. The weather was nice. And we just recently put up this swing set in our backyard, which I just mowed.
Yes.
I almost barreled down the swing set, but that's a different story. The mower is, it's just a lot to navigate.
Sure. Oh yeah.
But yeah, so the girls are obsessed with swinging. All they want to do is swing right now. So we have Annie in the middle because it's like a little baby swing for her.
My clubby co-host has swingers in the house.
We have swingers, yes.
All right.
Clubby swingers. And then Evie's next to her. And so what happened yesterday was a new experience. We're pushing both of them in the swing, and Evie kind of she gets bored, And so she was like on her belly. It really brings me back watching her on the swing set. Like she is on her belly on the swing, and she starts going side to side on the swing.
Of course.
Rather than like back and forth.
Right.
And meanwhile, Annie is going back and forth. So anyways, long story short, Evie knocks into Annie, and actually they like clunked heads together. Like you could hear it. It was pretty loud, but I think it hit like at the perfect point on both of their heads that there was no tears. Like everything was fine. It was just a loud skull noise.
Yeah.
And so I said to Evie, like, you gotta watch where you're going, you know? So if Annie is in the middle on her swing, you probably shouldn't be going side to side because you're going to hit her. So you can do that as long as she's not there. And so Evie heard me, and it was probably like, it was delayed. I want to say like 45 seconds, 60 seconds. She burst into tears, like inconsolable.
After you said something?
After I told her that. After I was not even like the tone of my voice. Like it was just trying to explain to her because it's something she didn't understand.
Right.
And so I just said, if Annie's here in her swing, don't go side to side because the chances of you hitting her are great. And so she just starts sobbing. It was like she took a moment to process and realized I did something that I shouldn't do, or I should have known better. I don't know exactly.
I hurt someone else.
I hurt somebody. I disappointed my mom and dad.
Yeah.
And she just started sobbing. And it took a good while Darren got to her first and like held her. And then I said, come to me. And I was on a swing and I had her sit on my lap. Remember, like, I think it was called spider swinging.
Yep.
I did that with her and just said, like, you didn't know. Everything's fine. Now that you know better, you can do better, essentially. But it like rocked me seeing her because the immediacy at which she felt shame was like jarring.
Yeah.
In some sense. And in another sense, because she's a lot like me and I go to shame very quickly, it was like, gosh, I understand this so much.
Yeah.
And for me, as now the parent or the one that did not, I don't even know what to call it because it wasn't misbehaving.
Sure.
Did not do the thing.
Being a child, being curious.
It was such a small deal. Like it wasn't a big thing at all. But for me, like it doesn't take a big thing to feel shame. It's like real quick for me. And she's the same way now. So that's a new thing to navigate.
And you having to deal that with that yourself, obviously you were able to see it in her and catch it earlier. Where do you think it comes from? Where do you think, obviously, what we know now from like social science and then also studying emotions and how emotions create hormones that get lodged in the body. We know that we literally pass not only our DNA, but like our emotional code and how we respond to things down to the next generation, which, we talk a lot on this program about Body Garage Dayton, which there's really no other organization out there like Body Garage Dayton, which has taken not only high-tech equipment, but also modalities that are thousands of years old to do that very thing where you identify and get past trauma and emotions that are lodged in the body, whether that's in tissue or fascia or muscles or the gut, out so that someone can actually have a fighting chance to become who they are supposed to be. If you have not checked out Body Garage Dayton, one of the things that we do in order to make it easy for people to make that jump is your first visit is always on us there at Body Garage Dayton. And so you can check that out and schedule your appointment at bodygaragedayton.com. But like that goes back to you, and you know that you are prone to shame and guilt. Like as you think about it, where does that take you? Like, when did that start? When did you recognize that you very quickly went to shame and guilt?
I have no idea.
It's as far back as you can remember.
Yes. And I just didn't know that it was shame. Same thing with anxiety.
Sure.
I was literally, this is kind of embarrassing. I don't feel ashamed, but I was a full grown adult when I figured out that the feeling I had in my body was anxiety.
Yeah.
And I'd felt it my whole life. That kind of shortness
You're
of
saying
breath.
like college or what?
I'd probably beyond that.
Wow.
Like grad school. Like I was in my mid-20s.
Wow.
Late 20s. And I had no idea. It's like somebody named it and I'm like, oh, I have felt this my whole life. I had no idea. And I think
it was just normal to you.
it was totally normal. And I think for shame. I mean, that I recognized earlier in life, but I didn't know how to stop it. Like it's a reflex, honestly.
Sure.
Shame is kind of a reflex for me.
Meaning when you say reflex, like it just happens, you feel like you don't even have a chance to recognize it until
It comes before I can even like stop it.
like it's underneath you almost,
Mm-hmm.
like it's a foundation you sit
And it
on.
blows my mind. Like, I think we've talked about this before. You don't feel shame as quickly as I do.
Sure.
And that blows my mind. I cannot comprehend not feeling shame like on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
It feels wild to me because it's so ingrained in my way of being.
Two things. So Ev is 3, right?
She's 3, yeah.
So, I mean, it's fair to say that you could have felt that and started dealing with shame and guilt or being prone.
And I mean, now that I look back on it, I have pretty early, probably not from 3 because I don't know that I have memories from 3, but very early memories of feeling shame where I would just like hide or shut down. And I see her doing that a lot.
So if we were dealing with people from a different culture or a different vernacular, again, another thing that we talk about with an emotionship is often it's energy that goes undiagnosed and we just deal with like descriptions or words, and words become greater than the reality, which leads to harm and pain that can't get fixed, like repeated patterns of pain that we can't fix because we just dance with like the description of things. If we were in a different culture that did not recognize the words shame and guilt, how would you describe like the feeling of shame when you deal with it?
Gosh, it is just like such a dark heaviness, like not like the cozy heaviness of like a weighted blanket.
Yeah.
It's like death, like such heaviness of like, I need to be punished. Like I do not deserve fill in the blank with any like sort of goodness. Like I am bad.
Yeah. At your core, it's the belief that you are bad or...
Yeah. That I should have known better, or I did know better and didn't do better. I'm a disappointment is a big one. I'm just not a good person. I'm not good to other people. I'm not like an upstanding member of society, essentially.
Yeah. And where do you think it came from?
Well, did you describe that it comes biologically?
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
Down from
Do you want more specifics?
Yeah, down from your parents?
Oh, yeah. I mean, probably I am a lot like my mother, just like my daughter's a lot like me. So I would say from her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what I have found, so you're saying that you are prone to guilt and shame. Other people would have other emotions or feelings that they're prone to based on the environment that they were raised in. And there is no perfect environment. And so if you're hearing this and you are quick to be embarrassed or feel like you're under attack, know that there is no perfect environment. What we're after are more informed environments where people understand what's happening, because when we understand what's happening, we therefore have some sort of knowledge or power to try to do something to change it. But like, again, when we look at someone that is raised in that environment, whether it's fear to control or anger is a big one. That's kind of the environment that I was raised in, that you were going to be controlled by a person's anger, and that was fear, that they created fear to control you. So you don't mess up because you don't want to feel the anger and therefore fear of that other person. I don't think we understand this well enough, that as parents or grandparents or teachers or coaches, what works long-term and what doesn't. I would say if it started with, let's say that it's passed down through the women in your line, that it started as an attempt to control someone that they did not understand. So I don't know how far back it goes in your family line, but it could be like your grandmother did not know how to relate to certain aspects of your mom. And so she would use her tone or her facial expression to say, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And unfortunately for most of humanity, it is somewhere around 80 to 90% of what we're not doing that gets all of the focus. And it leads to greater patterns of disappointment, because whatever you give attention and focus to as a parent, coach, teacher, grandparent, that's what grows. And so emphasis is emphasis. And when you're telling somebody not to do something, you're still emphasizing the behavior that they did not do, and you're giving power to see more of that. And so I think often we don't understand that when there's a certain problem with children or grandchildren, most of the time it comes back to they're just curious. Mm-hmm. And you as the parent have not taken the time, especially if you've lived in America over the last 75 years and how busy and work-oriented we are, that we haven't taken the time to understand the child or grandchild in front of us, or student or player. And we relate to them and teach them and coach them and direct them based on what we respond to. And the problem with that is the second layer to that is not only are we loving them or trying to direct them based off of how we receive direction, most of us unintentionally are leading out of our trauma and disappointment in life because no one has helped us identify it. And so because I am prone to shame and to hear what I did not do right, I lead out of that same place and repeat that in the next generation.
Right. I have memories of when I was older, a little bit older, so maybe out of college or out of high school, where the adults in my life would actively try and combat my shame.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, if it feels to me kind of like an impossible task.
Sure.
With Ev, especially, she's 3 and it's already a reflex for her.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering how to come alongside, how to kind of combat it now. And if there's no perfect environment that we're raised in, I guess, am I trading in shame for something else?
Yeah.
I don't even,
That's
it just
question.
it feels really difficult.
Yeah. Well, I think the opportunity is to realize that there are no perfect environments, but there are intentional environments. And I think you recognizing that, here's what I know from the brief interaction that I've had or been able to observe with your parents having moved here, 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. To me, it comes across that Ev is curious, independent, and strong-willed. I would say I know that to be true of you as well. From the brief interaction I've had with your mom, I would say that is true of her as well. And so when that's the case, and I've said this about my own parenting style, it took me a while to figure out that what I viewed as disobedience or disrespect or rebellion, using a church term, often was not that. It was curiosity. And so when you have the more independent, which obviously we want strong-willed, independent children, let alone daughters. Mm-hmm. When you have that, there are people that are being born today, like every other day, that are wired with the capacity to change the world. We don't know who those people are in the moment, but we do know that you have to be strong-willed in order to make a significant contribution while on this planet, because your ability to make a significant contribution to any community requires that you go through it and survive it, right? That's an element to most of the stories that are attractive to us. And often it's the curiosity and the absolute stubbornness and commitment to the idea or the determination without relenting to the point of giving up your life for it that drives you deep enough into the heart of any topic or any opportunity to be solved that's required. And so that being said, I imagine going all the way back, we'll just take it back to your mom's mom. If your mom has the capacity, which your mom's an accomplished person, written many books. If you have that, you've got to have that level of determination and independence that has to be cherished and stewarded as a parent. And when you don't recognize that, what you end up doing is trying to control that person because you don't understand that person. And it's almost like you're fighting their determination and curiosity, which can lead to creating energy. So most parents and grandparents don't understand that because this person seems to not be responding to our words, we create other realities to try to control them and get them to do what we want them to do. And that's where like shame and guilt would come in. And so, there's been a lot written about we're killing our mystics, our healers, our energy people in our communities because they tend to be the people that have empathy and compassion as a superpower, but they also are determined to take their own path because that's what they feel called to. And because it's so different than the mainstream, we really put things on them because we don't understand them and can't release them to their own journey. Yeah. And so then you wake up when you have empathy and compassion as a superpower, you wake up to feel the absolute opposite or what that is inverted. And in this case, that would be guilt and shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the long-term effects I have experienced is I walk with like a level of timidity.
Sure.
Timidness.
Yeah.
I'm timid. Because if I step into like the fullness of who I am and I'm bold and I'm courageous and I'm powerful, then I'm prone to make more mistakes, which then leads to shame.
Sure.
And like, I want to avoid feeling shame like it's the plague because it feels like death.
Yeah.
And so I've had to fight being timid in order to like step into like the fullness of who I was created to be.
Yeah.
At the risk of feeling shame or having to combat shame.
Well, one of the things that I said last week is if we make, we have unintentionally prioritized or worshiped the boring in the church versus the brave. And what's wrong with that is, and theologically, we were given all the tools that we needed to not be afraid of making mistakes: grace, mercy, forgiveness, imputed righteousness, all of these things, so that we could be brave, because braveness is what is required in order to become the full version of myself. Like, I have to take risks. Those are the people that we admire. And when we accidentally create a theology, an understanding of who God is, that puts mistakes as a major factor in the mix, you end up having a whole generation of people that are afraid to make mistakes. And if you can't make mistakes and be okay with it, you'll never fulfill your destiny.
Yeah. I think, and this is going back to what you said about Body Garage, why it's so important is because even I could tell with Evie yesterday, I can make a mistake and someone could come alongside me and like tend to me in the way that is like really kind and generous, and it does nothing. Like it doesn't cut through the shame. Like the shame is way too great.
For sure.
So it's like, I appreciate it. I see it. I acknowledge it. And like, I still feel terrible.
Yeah.
which that goes back to like how impossible this feels.
Sure.
Because Evie, I mean, she eventually worked herself out of it, but I don't know that it was because of me.
Yeah.
It just, she needed some time.
Well, you could see it in her body. You could see like it changed her demeanor.
Oh my gosh, she got so small. Her shoulders curled over and she just got so small.
For sure.
It was wild.
For sure. Well, a couple of things here. Number one, this is the kind of stuff that so many people deal with, but so many people are afraid to talk about. I think we don't say it enough, or we don't stop and pause and ask those of you that are listening to this program and have been listening regularly to help us out and to share these episodes. If they mean something to you or it resonates with you, to share this on whatever podcasting platform you're listening, because there are a lot of people out there that it might not be shame and guilt. It could be like a tremendous amount of anxiety or fear or worthlessness or confusion or hopelessness. Like the list goes on. And so you can help us by just getting this content out there. And you'll help people feel like they can talk about this and they are not unusual.
Yeah.
Way too many of us think like we are the freak and therefore we cannot talk about this because everybody else is fine.
For sure.
And it's the furthest thing from the truth.
Well, and that was one of the things that yesterday, as Evie gets older and I can have more intellectual and intentional conversations with her about shame, that will be helpful for her. For me, even just seeing her reaction and how quickly she felt shame, I mean, it hurt me that she felt that, but I felt so connected to her. Like,
Sure.
Oh my gosh, like I get it. I completely understand it. And it can be such an isolating feeling, you know? And so to your point, acknowledging like, yep, I feel this too. It's helpful.
Yeah. I, as you know, with City Church Dayton, having its last service this past Sunday, which is a whole nother story in and of itself, we, have been doing this 5-week series on Jesus. And the whole idea behind the series is just how, the person Jesus has been misrepresented for far too long. And it goes all the way back to, not long after he left this planet, that as someone that was creating a tremendous amount of value wherever he went, a community formed around him. And that was a major idea for the whole series, that wherever there is value, you will always see people gathering around. It reminds me of, when I was a kid and like break dancing was like a thing and super popular. Like,
did you?
No, I could not.
You weren't that popular.
No, I wasn't. But like if somebody broke out, right, like threw a piece of cardboard down and started to, like, everybody would gather around. Or
they did that at Dayton Christian?
No, of course not.
Okay. I didn't think so.
That was other places.
Yeah. Okay.
But people would gather around. And essentially, when Jesus comes on the scene, he is going into the temple, but he's also speaking out against the temple and the money changers or the gambling that was going on around it, because basically people were using the idea of God's presence and rallying around it to sell things for their own selfish benefit. And we, modern evangelicals are quick to be like, oh, that's terrible that they were selling things outside of God's presence. Really? I mean, a lot of us are doing that to this day.
Sure.
And, the idea that God is out there versus God being inside of us and the kingdom being inside of us has created a space in which people can live and exist to tell other people about how you get to know God better or experience God more, because God is out there and they are here to help you. Yeah. And like, so the series just took on like different ideas that communicate value and have value that organized religion has made popular in an attempt, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional, to manipulate and control people. like women being, the major driving factor in the Jesus movement. That Jesus, as a rabbi and a teacher, wasn't allowed to talk to women, and yet you find him at the center of his interaction, and a lot of his stories are about him talking with women, and not just Jewish women, but even like Samaritan women, and it's just like it was unheard of. Do you know the most pushback that I got from that week and that message that I said, if you want to be like Jesus, you have to have women at the forefront of a kingdom movement? Do you know the large majority of the pushback, maybe all of it, came from women?
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I took the passage that says that women should not talk in church, which is out of Timothy, and it's you have to understand the context of what was happening in that passage, and yet that the majority of the pushback I got was from women disagreeing with me about their equal opportunity to speak for God, and that historically speaking, women were driving the Jesus movement.
What do you think that's about?
I think humanity will always feel more comfortable staying in the caged mindset that they were given than breaking free from it and defying the fact or the idea that their value has to do with adhering to the rules.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazing to me that we will read that like salvation is a free gift from God that cannot be earned, so that no one can brag, and yet we still put all of these modifications around it that it is to be earned, and we have to perform for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean we've made it. It's class warfare.
I think there's something. To what you say about boring versus brave, there's something about. If I can know and understand all of the quote unquote rules and what I need to do, like I can figure that out and I can stay in my lane and be a good Christian.
Sure.
Which I think can be so limiting. It's like, what if you're a woman and you are like more powerful and full of life and impact than you can even imagine?
Sure.
But it takes you speaking up.
For sure.
And if you don't have to believe that that's your responsibility, you don't have to live into it.
For sure. I mean, and that's, I think it's true that as a human being, it is, you look at the story of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. At one point in time, like you almost lose your breath when they're headed toward the promised land, right, which represents destiny. And because they're facing adversity where they have to trust God to make something happen, like drop food out of the sky, they say to their leader, they say to Moses, like, it would have been better for us to be slaves in Egypt than to take the road to freedom because of how much uncertainty has to be processed. And like, I can use that word uncertainty on this podcast and people can be like, oh yeah, uncertainty. No, when you feel uncertainty, which means there is no clear answer or no clear direction, it's a different ballgame. It's not easy even when you expect it. Yeah. And so you all of a sudden can relate to the children of Israel saying like, you know what, even though we had to make bricks and we were fed crappy food and were considered slaves, at least I knew what I was going to have to deal with.
For sure. So profound.
And we just hate that. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is like we were made to live big lives. And I can't even say that without some people that are listening to this podcast right now evaluating that statement that they were made to live a big life without their programming kicking in. And their programming says, if you try to live a big life, that is selfishness. Somebody asked a question after service on Sunday about taking up their cross. And I think the way to process the biblical idea of taking up your cross on a daily basis is like considering your attachments and the things that you think you have to have in order to be happy. And actually, happiness has a lot more to do with having nothing and being content and grateful than having something in order to make you feel happy or grateful.
Right.
But, it's one thing to look at any given situation in our life and to evaluate it, right? That is very normal for American culture. This is what's happening. I'm going to project. It's either good or it's bad. It's dualism, right? It's right or it's wrong. It's another thing to be aware of the programming that made or that is the backdrop for what I'm calling good and what I'm calling evil, what I'm calling right and what I'm calling wrong. To know that somebody influenced the way I evaluate what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. And I think once you get to that place where you can start to say, okay, here's something that I'm making a value judgment on, but what makes me think that way? Then we start getting closer to the actual energy that is happening in life that can help us when we're just aware of it to start going in a different direction if that is what's needed or required.
Okay, give us an example.
If you look at somebody and you're evaluating their behavior as to whether or not it was right or wrong for the given moment, then I would suspect, and instead of allowing myself to just constantly be an editor that's evaluating everybody's decisions or performance in any given area, I would say, why am I having to evaluate how they're carrying themselves or what they're doing in this moment? What is that telling me about me? And even if I'm quote unquote right or wrong about my evaluation of their behavior, why do I need to do that? What is that making me feel, or how is that making me feel? And maybe that could be why I'm doing what I'm doing. In this situation of judging another person's trying to get to their motive or if they did something correctly or incorrectly, a lot of us were taught that the idea of good and evil has to do with is it a red light or a green light in God's book? Is it a pass, thumbs up, or is it a fail? That is not the right understanding of the biblical concept of good and evil. Good is the word kalos in Greek, which means a high standard. Poneros is the word for evil, which means social worthlessness. And so when it comes to evaluating programming, if I could make people think that some people get the thumbs up and some people get the thumbs down when it comes to God, then I could control them. Mm-hmm. And I could give them a message that has them living their whole life constantly looking upward or spending the time between their ears evaluating, are they getting a thumbs up with God? Or are they getting a thumbs down? Are they getting a green light or are they getting a red light? Mm-hmm. And for the people that are there, which have accidentally, not really, maybe intentionally, been programmed to constantly evaluate everything themselves, first and foremost in life, they cannot get to a place of purpose. They cannot get to a place of deep satisfaction because they are always measuring their value based on the people or around them or the environment that they're in.
Does that make them socially worthless?
I mean, you tell me.
I mean, that would be saying they're evil, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the word. And so when we look at this idea of good and evil, I was listening to the Liturgist podcast a couple weeks ago, and they had Catherine Wolfe, who just wrote this book on Beyond, the looking at the afterlife. And she looked at all world religions, and I think it came out last week, the book, I think it came out last week, and the name of it is Beyond. And one of the things that she said that is true when you look at these two words is that sin, not only in evangelical Christianity, but throughout the majority of world religions, all is socially oriented. It's the idea of how you interact with the people around you. And so pone eros, which is the word for evil, is not the thumbs up or the thumbs down from God. And like, let's put this in the context of like the guilt and the shame that you have had to deal with. What that is really saying is that a certain amount of your life has been looking to see and kind of constantly looking to the side to see if you add up.
For sure.
Are you getting the thumbs up or the green light? Or, oh my gosh, are you getting the thumbs down? Are you getting the red light? You're not as valuable because, oh, you did or you are evil. And so this is social construct. This is the people around the presence of God that are pimping out the presence of God in order to control people. In the same way your grandmother or your mother or even you could manipulate Ev because you want her to behave a certain way, you've got to find something of value and you use that, like her relationship with you, like you assume and you want her to love you. And there's something that you might not even know or acknowledge, but like you inherently know she's looking to you for approval.
Yeah.
And so when she does something wrong, most parents and grandparents or leaders or coaches or teachers don't know that when they give that face that says, I disapprove of you, or they use that tone that says, I don't approve of you, or you're such a dumbass, you're manipulating them and you're using the inherent value of your position to try to manipulate or control them and change their behavior.
For sure.
And ultimately, we end up doing ourselves a disfavor and creating a lot more harm than good. Because we're just trying to get them to do what we think they should do in that given moment. The idea of good and evil, I mean, when you go back to the garden, the one thing that God is trying to protect mankind from out of all things is the knowledge of good and evil. And God says, when you eat of this, when you partake of this, you will start to die internally. And so, we looked at Romans 14, 1-4, like, who are you to judge another person's servant? It's to their master that they stand or fall. And oh, by the way, verse 4, God is the one that is able to make them stand. So when we get into this editing business, coming all the way back around to answer your question, when we get into this editing business, what we fail to realize is we are coming around and we are manipulating people in order to try to control their behavior versus coming beside them to help them like go in the direction that they need to go to fulfill and become who they were made to be.
So good. I can already see Evie, when I'm watching her and she doesn't know that I'm watching her, and she's curious. And so she's doing something that I think legitimately doesn't know if she's supposed to be doing or not.
Sure.
She'll look at me and she'll catch me watching her. And then she kind of waits for a moment before she continues because she wants to know, like, are you going to tell me to stop or are you going to let me continue to explore whatever she's exploring? The social construct, you can find anybody to agree or disagree with anything that you're doing, which is so, to your point, like it's so real. Yeah. Like I could eat a piece of bacon and have a number of people that agree and celebrate and say, yes, bacon's the best. And a number of people that say like, you're an animal killer or whatever. That's not healthy for you. It is healthy for you. You need that kind of fat. You don't need that. It's just almost anything. I think you can find groups of people that support or condemn what you're doing, which is kind of mind-boggling, and something you've been saying the past 5 weeks a lot is just like listening to that inner consciousness or sinking into your knowing and like living the life that you specifically, like that God created you to live, which might mean that you piss a lot of people off or that a lot of people celebrate you, probably a little bit of both, but you can always find people that think that you're good or bad.
Well, and the one thing that I always get pushback on when I talk like this is, yeah, but where's the standard? Yeah, but where are the moral cops? You know, where's the spiritual sheriff that's going to say this person is right, this person is wrong, this person is right? Mm-hmm. And it's like that's not the right definition of good and evil.
Well, and something that you've said before is there are still consequences.
Sure.
That we have to live with based on our decisions, which is enough, I think, for a lot of us.
And again, getting back to answering your question.
What was my question? I don't even remember.
Just practically speaking, what does it look like as an example of not suspecting our programming and instead living into like always looking at the superficial? What most of us do not understand because we never question our programming is that we want to be in control, and that is our programming. That if you're not in control, you are not safe. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to a lot of trauma that we have inherited and dealt with and are still dealing with because of a level of ignorance. And so I will look at a person and say something like, well, yeah, but what if this person says that they love God, but they're still doing these things? It's one thing to ask that question and look at 10 people in the room or search YouTube or whatever it is for the spiritual guru that's going to answer that question for you. A higher level of knowledge and therefore godliness is saying, why do I have to have the answer to that? What is it about my programming that makes me think there has to be a spiritual sheriff that is keeping everyone accountable? Yeah. What is the answer to that? You were taught that in order to feel safe, you have to be in control. Or there has to be someone that you can see and touch and interact with that is going to make everything right and keep everything going in the right track. And biblically speaking, it's not the case. Who are you to judge another person's servant? It is to God that they will answer. God is able to make them stand. God is the one that is able to change the person's heart. And so for the person that is always editing, we don't suspect our programming. We do not suspect our trauma.
Okay, but so there is a level of like, I don't know. The only word that's coming to me is like organization. That's necessary to live in a society, right? I mean, there is something. We need stoplights.
Sure.
And so when it comes to how we behave, the things that we do, how do you respond to? I understand what you're saying about like we don't need a spiritual sheriff.
Sure.
But there are some standards.
Well, but what it comes back to is you're right. The appropriate understanding of good and evil is kalos. Good is a high standard, which means living toward that which adheres to the facts, right? I can get away with speeding, but it is not the highest standard when it comes to the law of averages and how many people are on the road and how much more likely you are to get in an accident when you are speeding or running stop signs or not adhering to lights. But evil is the result of or defined by poneros is social worthlessness, that you are not being productive, that you are not contributing to the community that is around you. That is the very definition of good and evil, our ability to contribute to those around us. And contributing to those around us does not begin with constantly making an evaluation or a value determination on what they are doing. It's being a human being and not a human doing. We're not like constantly evaluating everything because those are the people that do wake up and figure out, socially speaking, they're not contributing. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing saying that, like, if you had, those that profess to be Jesus followers actually try to live into the life of Jesus and be what Jesus was to his community, the world would be a different place. Yeah. But instead, we have accidentally let good and evil become ideas of proximity and seriousness to God. Oh, they are more serious about God. They love God more. This person is closer to God. This person is more valuable. I said 2 weeks ago that we shape the idea of God, and that idea of God shapes us. Mm-hmm. And so, using the parable of the prodigal son, one of the things that I love the most about that is when the younger son says, I want half of my inheritance. The father that represents God gives it to him, though he knows that son is not in a place to handle it correctly. And he therefore finances his reckless living and the prostitutes that are mentioned in that passage. But even greater than the father knowing he had to release the son to his ignorance, and he could have lost him. He could have made a mistake that took his life. It says when the son was a long way off, but had determined to return because it was better under the father's roof than being out there. It says when the son was a long way off, he was still a long ways off. The father ran to him. And so the idea of good and evil in that situation still revolves around social value, but I'm running to people. I'm not assessing them and assessing their worth or their intrinsic value. I'm running to them and I'm being committed to them. It's not how we behave that makes us who we are. It's whose image that we have been made in that makes us valuable.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing is how we live a big life. I think about when I see Evie feel a lot of shame or already at 3 be so concerned about if she's being good or if she's being bad, or
for sure
if she grows up being so concerned about if the person next to her is being good or being bad. It's like, I did not labor for 36 hours and like push you out of my unmedicated body to have that be the life that you live.
Sure.
Like that's not what I want for you.
Sure.
And I feel like that God feels the same way of like, he didn't put us on this earth to like spend our life trying to stay in between in the lines and make sure that everybody else is too. Like we're going to screw up, but, there's a bigness, there's an enormity to, our purpose that cannot be fulfilled if we're so concerned about good and bad for ourselves and other people.
Yeah. Unfortunately, safe will always have the loudest voice. And often unintentionally, it is those who have lived the safest life that will be put up on a pedestal as to the life that is to be followed or imitated. But that's why we have the problem that we have. When safe becomes associated with the idea of God, not only is it unbiblical, it will lead to a very boring, disappointed result. There's something to be said, having started this program off, talking about just generationally how things are passed down. Jesus, even as a young child, stirred up his parents' anxiety as they were headed out of town in the caravan. He's already being curious and going back into the temple without his parents' instruction or oversight. Mark chapter 3, Jesus is away from his mother, brothers, and sisters, and like they come looking for him as he's off on his own, doing his own thing. And, I had this thought this morning there is a real danger for mothers who are afraid to create an environment that celebrates their children leaving the nest. It could be a real indicator that in not being brave yourself, you do not have the courage to allow or promote your own children to be brave. And in doing so, we pass down to, once again, another generation, the same lack of courage and independence that is required or necessary for them to go out and fulfill their own destiny.
Right. It makes me emotional because it's so sad. Like how easy it is to have an unlived life.
Yeah.
And I don't think most parents that fear or are unable to let their kids go, it's not out of ill intentions.
Sure.
They're not trying to be bad. They're just, it's hard. It's hard. It's really hard. But like you're saying, it just creates generations upon generations of unlived lives. And that makes my stomach hurt at just the loss of so many people that had so much potential that couldn't get out of the boring.
Yeah, you can, I don't think it takes a lot to imagine what those children are unwilling to do or cannot see if being brave is not modeled for them. Most of the people we admire throughout Scripture are people that had to get out, that got out. And in getting out, whether it was their choosing through rebellion or braveness, or they were taken, like Joseph, and even Esther. Often there is a required leaving of your environment to push out into what God has for you.
And the Bible definitely is not full of boring people.
No.
Okay. Enough weeping.
Episode 65, everyone.